Hello and welcome to another episode of Game Develop Repeat. I am Chris, a music teacher turned game developer, and today I'm going to be talking about what I've learned about game development through playing the Yakuza games, specifically Yakuza 0, Kiwami 1, and Kiwami 2. Those are the only ones I've played so far. Let's dive into it. The Yakuza games are some of the most bizarre, fascinating, and wonderful experiences I've had in gaming. I think the only games I've played that were more confusing were like Katamari Damacy, which I love. That is one of my favorites of all time. I need to add that to the list of games to talk about. And like Incredible Crisis, which I think is probably less well known, but that's a weird old PlayStation game. Those are some weird ones too. But this is bizarre in a completely different way. It is weird in terms of the stories that it is that it is telling. Excuse me. The characters are all very compelling, and they feel like they could be real people, sort of. Like they're all very intense, and you know what? I like intensity. I like an intense character. But they don't bother me. How am I going to make this analogy? We're going to compare this to anime. There's a lot of anime where a character is very intense and the character kind of gets on my nerves, right? It's like, wow, that's a really intense character who won't stop screaming, or who's always this way, or that. Like they have one character trope and they lean so aggressive into it, and it can get on my nerves and it can drive me crazy. Yakuza characters don't have that sort of intensity where it's like a gimmick that they won't stop with, but they do have the kind of intensity where you're like, man, everybody is so serious about everything they're doing, and everything is like life or death, including the disco. And this is where Yakuza shines. They take they they have so many mini games, and every one of those mini games is just beautiful. It's so stupid in the best way. Like there's a bowling mini game that has like its whole separate quest progression thing to it. Like I say that there's like a reason to get good at bowling in one of the games to unlock something, right? Like it feels rewarding when you pull it off. There's a slot car racing game, which is an entire game in and of itself. There's a fishing mini game, which I love fishing mini games. Surprisingly, I didn't end up playing this fishing mini game more than I just like played the rest of the game. It's not like it didn't pull me in. I think maybe just because the rest of the game was so good. And then like there's like darts, I think there's pool, there's mahjong, there's a whole management, there's like a cabaret management game within the game, at least for Yakuza 0 and for Kiwami 2. I don't know if it's in Kiwami 1 or not. If it is, I didn't run into it, so I think it probably isn't, or it's tucked away somewhere if it is there. Anyway, all of these little mini games are also taken like pretty seriously in terms of like the way the characters act. So you have this great like deadpan comedy thing going on where they're all playing it totally straight, but the situations are just absurd. And that, I think, is part of the charm. Maybe the most charming part about this game is that they're living these absurd lives and playing it straight and taking it seriously. And I don't want this to come over like the entire game is just one festival of absurdity. There is a ton of absurdity in the game, but the game also it tackles some like pretty serious stuff, which is cool. There's a lot of stuff about defending the people that you love and like about duty and purpose and like there's kind of this undercurrent of like finding your way and who you are and all of this. There's a lot of like character growth. I mean, the main character Kiryu is like very like stoic, like just kind of takes everything on the chin. Like there's that to it. But it's all, there's a comparison to be made to Grand Theft Auto because they're both games about crime. In terms of like story and angle of approach, not really in terms of gameplay. The gameplay is actually very, very different between the two. Grand Theft Auto takes crime and goes, look at, you're playing a criminal. We're gonna make fun of the criminal that you're playing. Like, oh, these criminals are terrible people, and we're gonna mock them. You're like, all right, cool. And then you're like, oh, also you're gonna be a terrible person while you're playing this criminal. You're gonna go shoot random civilians. Like, you're gonna be a bad person. Like, all right, got it. Yakuza is like, you are a criminal and you have a duty to these people, and death is something to be taken very, very seriously, and we don't just go around killing people. Like, that's not what this game is about, right? Yakuza is very much, there's very much like a duty and purpose embedded in the crime. There's there's a lot of it's a more optimistic look at like crime families. Like there is like a sense of humanity behind all the people involved, much more so than the way that we treat it in like a Grand Theft Auto kind of a game, which I really appreciate. I'm gonna mention another mini game really quickly. There is a crane mini game, like, you know, those cranes you played as a kid at a restaurant where you're like, they're basically just scams where like you're trying to get a stuffed animal out of this crane and you end up spending like $40 to get one thing out of this extremely weak crane. That is a mini game, and it's not just something that you walk up to and play. I mean, it can be. It is also a quest. There are quests, side quests, where you got to do that, and there's like great stories built into it. Like, you hear that and you think, oh god, a side quest where I have to play one of those freaking crane games? That sounds terrible. But because of the story behind it, it's like, I want to see what happens next. In most RPGs, there's always this moment I have where I go, side quest, well, I should probably do it. In this, I was like, oh, side quest, what's going on with this person? What are they going to do when I do this for them? Where is this going to lead? What crazy antics am I going to get up to? Every side quest feels like an adventure because the writing is interesting and compelling enough. There's nothing in this. There's nothing really in the side quests. And this is across 3 games. Keep that in mind. Across all 3 of these games, I think there was like one side quest where I went, that's frustrating and I don't want to deal with it, right? And that's because it wanted me to learn how to play Mahjong, and I have no idea how that works. I was reading the instructions, I was like, this is way too much. I can't figure this out right now. I got a game to play. But all the side quests they don't feel like I have to do this, for one. And then for a second part, there's a good reason to do them. Like the motivation for doing side quests, this is what it is. The motivation for doing side quests is not, you want experience, you want money, here are side quests. The motivation for the side quests is, do you want to help this person? Do you want to see what happens next in this person's story? Do you want to see how Kiryu, the main character, or Majima, kind of, in Yakuza 0 there are 2 main characters. But anyway, you're going to go through it and you're going to go, do I want to see how my guy reacts to this? And if it's an interesting enough situation, you're going to be like, yeah, I want to see how he reacts to this. His reaction is going to be funny. Like, he's going to play it straight, or this is going to, like, he's going to get put in this uncomfortable situation. It's great. I didn't realize that until just now talking about it, that's one of the biggest reasons why I like this game, is because the side quests are not just a thing for experience. I recently finished Dragon Quest Echoes of an Elusive Age, and the most recent Dragon Quest, and mainline Dragon Quest. I forget which number it is. I'm sorry, but I don't know it off the top of my head. But it's the one that has Echoes of an Elusive Age on it. I recently finished that, and thinking about it, like, there are a few quests in there where it feels like, oh, walk here, walk back, do this, like the classic JRPG thing. Having said that, that game is very good. Strongly recommend for a lot of reasons. But it does have a couple of those moments where I was playing a quest and I went, I don't really want to do this quest, but I do want the reward, so I'll just do it to get the reward. In Yakuza, there is not a single time that I did a quest just to get the reward. I don't remember what the quest rewards were for almost anything. There was a quest where I gave away a ton of money to help an orphanage. I don't remember what the return on that was. I was just like, oh, I need to do this. I'm invested in this. The game gets you invested in the characters and the story. And that's cool. I didn't even realize this. That's really cool. There's so many games I play where the reason you're doing the quest is because it's a side quest, and you as a player do side quests. At least I do, typically. Not as much anymore. I'm pulling away from that a little bit, and it's been really nice. But I think from a development perspective, and I don't mean to jump into the developing stuff, but just one little note, from a development perspective, I think a lot of games are designed to reward the player with gear or experience or whatever for the character, instead of rewarding the player with interesting stuff about the game. And I think those two things feel very different. Like, if I'm playing a game that's going to reward me with money, gear, and experience, I'm like, cool. Now I'm ready for that fight. But if I'm playing a game where it's going to reward me with a cool, interesting character building moment, that's great. And I think that's probably not easy to pull off for a lot of reasons, but oh man, I like it. I'm glad I realized that. That's I didn't realize that was part of the, see, this is why I'm doing the podcast. Find out cool little things like that while I'm talking through it. Okay. Other things about the game. Just to just to sell you on it, a little bit late to this part. It's sort of like an open world brawler RPG. The combat is a little bit fighting game style, brawler, I guess, is the word that people use to describe this combat. A whole bunch of enemies attacking you at once, dodge around a little bit, punch them out, dodge around. The combat is visceral for a game that takes death very seriously, and especially Yakuza 0, for games that really make a point of being killing people is a big deal. This game, they really beat the crap out of your enemies. There is some aggressive combat. There's you're picking up motorcycles and dropping them on people and then diving on top of the motorcycle. It's violent. It's aggressive. It's a lot. But you know what? It's pretty great. It's great. I wish I could read everything around the cities. I wish I understood. This is not actually a detriment to the game. It's actually a positive thing, because if they tried to translate this into English for me, if all the text on all the buildings was in English, it would be ugly and overwhelming, and there's just no way to do it. So it just creates a cool aesthetic, basically. I look at it and I'm like, oh, cool, great. But there is so much culture to the city, and across these games, there's some time that passes between each game. I would love to be able to read everything on these buildings and see what business is what, and what has changed over the years and all of these interesting details, but I can't because I don't speak Japanese and I don't have I don't know the alphabet. And it would be so cool to experience the environment on that level of like, right, like I think this is a layer that the Western audience is completely missing out on these games, even though the translation and the localization of these games must be really good, because I've seen like there's there's so much weird to these games and it all comes across really cleanly to me, right? Like there've been a few games where I play something and I go, why is that? That must be I just must not understand that joke because of a cultural thing. Yakuza, I don't think had any moments where I was like, I don't understand that joke because of a cultural thing. I think there was like, yeah, I think they really did a good job of like making sure that I understood everything, and like there wasn't any like cognitive dissonance pulling me out of the game where I was like confused and trying to like unravel something and be like, wait, what does that mean? Like it's pretty clean. But even with all of that, I think it would be a huge benefit to be able to read what's on those signs, because this game is full of signs. It is like, it's in cities, right? It takes place in very busy cities in Japan. And it would just be great to understand what is plastered all over the city. I ended up trying to learn a little bit of like hiragana and katakana because I was playing these games. I mean, across 3 games, I reached this point where I'm like, I gotta know at least a couple of these symbols. Like, and I've learned basically nothing because, oh my God, that's a hard one to just like fit in my spare time. The Japanese alphabet is a whole different thing. Anyway, I'm still working at that, but this game inspired me to pick up another new random skill. So it's cool. It's a great, the first 3 games, the remakes, for 1 and 2, and then the prequel Yakuza 0, they're great. Really enjoyed them. I played them all on PC. I played them all through Steam. So those ports worked completely fine for me. I didn't have any issues. If you want to check them out, highly recommend. You don't have to play all 3. They're kind of the same thing, but the story, if you get invested in the characters, then I'd say it's worth playing a little further. I've not played any of the later games yet because my understanding is Yakuza 3 is a tough one to get through because it did not get the same like remake treatment. And it can be a hard one to get through, especially on the port. Apparently it's just like slow and frustrating in a lot of ways. Although I am going to play like a dragon at some point. Anyway, enough about that. As you can tell, I like them. They're good games. Let's now get into what I have learned from playing these games. Let's do my little book report, little positive spin to be like, yeah, no, this was research. This was research in game development. Let's get into that section. All right, what have I learned from these games? That is the question for today. What have I learned from Yakuza 0, 1, and 2? This is a little bit tricky because there's a lot of game development lessons I can take away from this. And some of them are like straightforward. Some of them are like entire skills that I would have to develop, like pretty intense ones. Some of them are like very applicable to my, like, are they? There's a couple things that are applicable to the project I'm working on right now, but like I'm working on a 2D platformer, so like it's a little bit of a stretch. And then there's a couple things that are not at all applicable, but I want to keep in mind for future projects. Let's talk about the standout stuff, the most obvious stuff first. One, you know what? Let's pick 3 things. First thing we're going to talk about is the story and how wacky it is. Easy, right? Second thing we're going to talk about is the world design. And then the third thing is going to be character versus player motivation. Story is going to be very quick. The takeaway for me from story, from the story, is you can do some wild, goofy, bizarre stories and have them be amazing. And you can deadpan, you can go over the top is what I'm really getting at. You can be so over the top, super dramatic, as long as you do it right. As long as you have some real talent behind it. Like their voice actors kill it. Actually I shouldn't say that. I can't tell because I don't speak Japanese, but it seemed like their voice actors were killing it. There is no English dub, by the way. It's all in Japanese one way or another. You just kind of have to accept it going into the game that you're going to be reading subtitles. So that's a big part of it. You can do crazy, big, goofy, bizarre, dramatic stuff as long as you execute it well. So if your writing is really good, if you're a great writer, you think you can pull it off, you can absolutely get away with it. Like, the risk is not that people aren't going to love some wacky story. The risk is that it's not going to be delivered correctly. That's the real challenge. That's how I feel about it anyway. So that's the takeaway from the story. Let's talk about the world design. The takeaway here, and this is the one that I think is applicable to like any game, honestly. I think this is like I kind of imagine a philosophy coming out of this. And that philosophy would be make the most of what you have before you expand and make more things. So the way that the world is designed in this game is it feels like an open world, even though it's a couple of cities. Like, it's not a very open world. It's kind of got a little bit in common with In Other Waters in that way, where like there's not like a ton of locations, but everything is so impactful that it feels it's extremely alive. So like all the buildings you can like the whole city feels alive. There's only a certain number of buildings you can go into, but I never really had many moments where I was like, oh, why can't I walk into that door? I just kind of like understood it and it was fine. It's very, very fleshed out, rather than having you travel through like a huge open world. It just focuses in on these cities and has these cities be fleshed out to the fullest extent. And I think a huge part of that is the people in the cities are compelling. The people you interact with have a lot to offer. The people in this game are the core of the entertainment value. And they are populating this small city. So they had the city. They realize, I assume this, the game developers probably realize, like, we don't need to make all of Japan, you know? And there are game developers who would try to do that, I think, right? There are all sorts of games where it's like, oh, we just made an entire continent. Here we go. They don't need to do that. They just need to make these cities feel amazing to explore. Think about it in your own life. Like, have you explored everything in the area that you live in? Really? Like, if you think about the 5-mile radius, do you actually know everything that's going on? Have you talked to everybody? Like, that's what they're doing. They're going, oh, we can just make it so that you can interact with everything here. There's a bar here that you can go to and the drinks get like delivered to you in this over the top marketing way. Like they tell you all about the drink you're about to have in the game, right? There's like the dartboard. There's all these things that feel like you're actually exploring the city. They took their setting and they fleshed it out. And they didn't go wild with the size of it. I think if they had tried to make it a lot bigger, it would probably be missing like a lot of the depth. Rather than going super wide, they went super deep. Rather than developing a super big world, they developed a super compelling smaller experience. What was the third thing that I said I was going to talk about? I said I was going to talk about story. I said I was going to talk about level design. And then I said, oh, wait, one more thing with level design. How does this apply to my game? I'm working on this little platformer, right? The way I'm taking this is rather than adding a bunch of different mechanics, I'm going to work with the mechanics that I have. I'm going to work with the basic ideas that I have. So the basic idea in Yakuza is that you are living in this city, you are exploring this city, you are enjoying everything going on here, and you are a person in this city. Like you're interacting with it, you're a part of it, even if you're kind of an outsider. So then what is the basic mechanic, the core idea of my platformer, right? Well, am I sure of that? I think right now the draft of the basic idea in my platformer is you have these, I don't want to get into every detail of it, but you have these few core mechanics. You have this jump, you have this second jump, you have this attack, and you have a level design that is always moving in this direction, right? Like you're always going to this kind of place. And then you've got a few core enemies. And then my goal is to explore those concepts as thoroughly as I can. My goal is to explore those and really flesh them out so that there's nothing where somebody goes, why can't that enemy do this? Why is it that when those two enemies bump into each other, this interaction doesn't happen? Like why isn't the player able to interact with that platform in this way? It's that sort of a thing. That's how I'm applying it to my own game design. And that's like a less in-depth application, but like I'm going to cut myself some slack to it. I'm still learning this. Let's move on to the third point that we were talking about, which I'm now remembering was character rewards versus like player rewards. I think that might not be exactly how I phrased it, but the player's motivation is different than the character's motivation, and motivating a player directly through, hey, you will get this thing that will make the game easier. That's kind of how I feel like a lot of games do it, where it's like, what does the player get as a reward for doing this with the character? And I think that's still kind of what Yakuza is doing, but they're doing it from a different kind of angle. And I already talked about this a little bit, but just to reiterate it, because I think it's such an important takeaway, they are saying, what does the character experience as a result of this side quest, which the player then gets to witness, and that's the player reward. And they still give you the experience points and the gold or whatever, and the money, so on. They still give you that, but I don't even notice what it is because I'm too busy experiencing what the character is experiencing. So they've properly layered this into like I don't, how would I phrase this? Oh, I hope that wasn't loud. I bumped the microphone a little bit. If the game has this amazing weapon that you unlock from some side quest, I feel like as a player, you should be celebrating what the character got and the character's experience rather than celebrating what you, the player, got. Does that make sense to me or to you? I think that makes sense. Let me reiterate it a different way, though, just to make sure that I've got a grasp on this. If the player receives a reward, that's different than the character receiving a reward. Because if the character receives it and reacts to it, then the player is observing the character's reaction and enjoyment, which improves your immersion. Whereas if you're giving the reward direct to the player, that's not as immersive. And there are subtleties to how you deliver rewards and what the rewards are, which decide whether it is a reward for a character that the player then kind of experiences in character, or a reward for the player that the character kind of ignores. Like, there are things where it's like the character wouldn't ignore this. They just got the greatest weapon of all time, whatever. They'd be hyped. So I think that's a really interesting angle that I'm very excited about, and I'm glad that this recording helped me to unlock. Let's move on. Let's talk about the repeat section of this podcast, the repeatable behavior that you can do to help in this whole game development learning journey. I am beginning to realize that this chunk of this show is slightly different from what I originally intended it to be. I think this chunk of the show is about sustainability. It's about making sure that we are able to keep doing what we love throughout, as long as we want to. And I'm passionate about that because that's an issue that I ran into previously in music. There's a lot of burnout in music. There's a lot of short-term thinking, and it's not even a short-term thinking. It's that it's a profession that can just annihilate you pretty quickly. It can just take you from super excited about it to like, okay, I'm overworked and I'm burned out on this. And because of my experiences with music in that regard, I'm very invested in making sure that my game development journey remains sustainable, that I keep that developing games remains enticing to me, that it remains exciting, that it remains interesting. And in that light, one of the first things that I thought of for this episode is another thing that I'm currently working on to help me stay sustainable with this, which is to stand up regularly when developing. It's so easy to get in the zone and just sit there for 4 hours straight and do nothing but just code and just be just locked in, right? But over the years, that's going to wear down on your body, and whatever wears down on your body wears down your mind in some way, right? Like if your body feels like crap, then your mind is like distracted by the fact that your body feels like crap. So that's the first thing I jumped to. But then I was also like, I don't want to preach about that. I'm not doing that right now anyway. Like, who am I to say that? But that's one potential option. The other option, and this is something that I feel like gets super neglected. So I'm going to give you this tip too, in case you hear that one and you go, I've heard that a million times. Screw that, whatever. I don't need to get up every hour. People say like every half hour. I'm like, bro, I'm not. Every half hour, I don't think I'm going to do that. Like, I think I can hear that and go, oh, perfect. That ain't going to happen. Every hour, I'll give every hour a shot. I'll give that a try, at least stand up for like 5 minutes every half hour. But here's the other thought. Engage with communities. I have found that becoming a part of I'm not even like intensely super engaged with these communities, but I'm getting engaged with some game development communities. I'm in like a couple Discords, that sort of thing. If you can engage with some communities, it's going to inspire you, it's going to motivate you, it's going to keep you excited. And whenever you kind of fall off and like fall away from development, if that happens, you're going to have that community waiting for you, and you're going to be able to be like, oh yeah, I can just say hey to those guys and see what they're up to. I don't even have to develop right now. I can just check in, right? Yeah, I think engaging with community is important. And I'm not saying that because I've started the Discord. Like, I have started a Discord, by the way, but I'm the only person there right now. So it's not a community yet. It's going to be eventually, potentially. We're working on it. But I'm in like the Game Maker's Toolkit Discord, like, because I don't even like post in there. I just kind of lurk, read some stuff, you know. And I'm part of a really important community to me is it's Tallest Tower Games. They make a podcast. They actually got me started on doing this podcast kind of indirectly. They inspired me to do this. And I do a little segment for them sometimes too, a little 5-minute segment for their podcast. That podcast is, what is the name of the actual podcast? It's the Distinguished Humans Indie Game Dev Club, I think is the name of it. That's a good one. That's a little tight-knit community. So that's not even to direct you to any of these specific places. That is to say that community is an important thing, and it has a huge impact on whether or not you accomplish your goals. Two of the biggest things that impact whether or not you accomplish a goal that you've set for yourself are the likelihood of success and the impact on yourself and others. So like social impact, right? If there's a community watching you work on something, it's going to have more of an impact, and you're going to have more of a chance of success because you've got these people there alongside you. Okay, that's everything for this week. I will see you all next week. Have a good week. Have a good time. Enjoy it. Create some stuff. Connect with some people. And make beautiful games.